Last week, the sport of boxing got some news that may have been shocking to some. Jake Paul's next fight is going to go down on July 20th, and it will be against former heavyweight world champion and boxing legend Mike Tyson. The fight will be streamed live on Netflix. So let's talk about what this fight means for the sport and more. We'll talk about it with one of the hosts of the Mandatory Boxing Show. That would be Bryan Fonseca, who joins me now. Bryan, how's it going?
Going well. A little confused at this at first, but once you peel back the layers, it kind of makes a little bit of sense here, what we're going to see.
Okay, I want to hear about how it makes sense. We're going to get into all of that. I agree this was a confusing emotion for some when they saw this news. But Bryan, when you saw the news, when it came down, being the boxing guru that you are, I have to ask you a question that you know that I always ask around shocking events. You've known me for quite some time. Who asked for this? And is this a good fight for the sport of boxing?
In terms of who asked for this, I don't have a great answer for you. And I know this is one of your go-to sort of questions. I don't have a great answer for you as to who asked for this, or the other question you like to ask, Dex, is who is this for? I probably have a better answer for that question. And that is for, well, everybody, because this is going to be on Netflix. Netflix, from their perspective, they're trying to showcase, hey, we can put on live programming, live sports. You and I both know there's a lot of money in live sports. There's a lot of competition for airing live sports. Netflix is going to have WWE. They're going to have Raw starting in 2025. So, you just saw a big tennis match there. We're going to start seeing more Netflix events. And then having Jake Paul there, I mean, there's a prior relationship there. Jake Paul was featured on an episode of Untold, I believe, and they had a documentary there, one that I haven't finished watching, not because I didn't like it or whatever, but I just, got busy midway through. And then Mike Tyson is Mike Tyson. Why would you not want to do business with Mike Tyson? So them fighting each other, I'm not sure who asked for this, but I think ultimately people are going to watch it. And I think that's why this is happening.
So I think it's interesting you say there that it is for everyone, right? It has this wide reach, and I think that's what Netflix is hoping for. And I think one of the interesting part of the news is that Netflix is streaming this fight. You mentioned this. We saw Netflix broadcast a live tennis match already. So I got to ask you this. Is this fight more about Netflix showing that they can handle live streaming sports, as it seems that they want to do, but to a very large audience? Since you said this is for everybody, this would be a pretty large audience. It makes you wonder if Netflix is trying to angle for something down the road. I don't know, like the NFL. No inside knowledge on that. But do you think this is about Netflix showing that they can stream a live sporting event to a very large audience?
All of these networks know how valuable sports rights are, because it's one of the things that you can gather people around for and still have them watch the same event. And there's a lot of currency in that. There's not a lot of things that you can sort of gather people around for. It's why we look at the end of every year, and when you look at the top 100 broadcasts for that particular calendar year, a lot of them are NFL games or just sporting events in general, because that's where you can get people all in one place at one time. And Netflix has been a streaming service where you can watch things on demand, et cetera, et cetera. We've known that throughout the course of their existence. But as it pertains to live broadcasts, they can see that there's another bag there to be had. And because sports rights are sort of up in the air right now, like we don't know what the future is going to be for some of the prominent leagues across the country. We know that the NBA rights are sort of in flux, and who's going to sort of challenge for that, the NFL, MLB, and all those things. Boxing is an interesting market because it's not really centralized for better or worse, or I would say better and worse in a way. And because of that, you can have different buyers there. Like, let's remember ESPN has their top ranked deal. Amazon now has Premier Boxing Champions, who was previously with Showtime and Fox. And remember when PBC launched in 2015, there was also NBC and Spike TV and Bounce TV and CBS at one point. And then eventually it just became mostly Fox and Showtime, and pretty much exclusively Showtime at one point. So there's a lot of bouncing around there. And then DAZN has their own streaming service. And, they like to sell like sort of live events on that too. It's boxing, it's soccer, and things of that nature. So I think for Netflix, yeah, this is an interesting way to sort of showcase it, right? Like it's a crossover fight to some degree, if you want to call it that, or definitely a celebrity boxing match. But it's a way that, it gets eyeballs on your product from a live sporting perspective, and you're going to have two big names that garner interest in order to do that.
Yeah, it definitely is going to garner interest. Been a lot of talk about it already. And speaking of talk, there's been a ton of talk about who would win this fight. And also the age difference between the fighters. Mike Tyson, 57 years old. Jake Paul, 27 years old. Who's more likely to deliver a knockout in this matchup? Is it Iron Mike or is it Jake Paul?
It better be Iron Mike, given how much Jake Paul victory would perhaps tilt things in terms of boxing commentary's perspective. Mike Tyson will be 58 years old by the time this fight actually goes underway because his birthday is shortly before this. So you have somebody who's near 60 and you have somebody else who's near 30. So yes, Mike Tyson, you are old enough to be Jake Paul's father and you're fighting him in this bout. And, you know, it's a difficult fight to analyze because Jake Paul and Mike Tyson aren't even in the same weight class. And you look at Jake Paul's most recent efforts, both first round knockouts against boxers who are pro boxers. But as I sort of talked about, guys who were coming off long layoffs, guys who were coming off, unspectacular competition, bad resumes, let's call it what it is. And then Mike Tyson, who hasn't boxed professionally in about since 2005, and he was looking terrible those last couple of years on the way out. You also do have the exhibition that we forget about with Roy Jones Jr. and that whole Triller experiment, which is interesting that both of these guys actually come from, some Triller sort of exhibitions, if you will. And he fought Roy Jones Jr., not really fought, but, it didn't look great. But you saw that Mike Tyson clearly still has some juice there. And I remember being more worried about Roy Jones Jr. because we've seen him get knocked out silly. So in terms of who's going to win this fight, the answer better be Mike Tyson. But if you look at the betting odds, Jake Paul is actually the slight favorite right now. So that's interesting, despite giving up what will probably be something along the lines of 40 or so pounds in terms of weight.
Yeah, that's the thing for me, right? Not in the same weight class. You've got the age difference. You've also got a skill difference here, which I guess some people think that's interesting, but it's just a wonder. Could Jake Paul get knocked out? Is Mike Tyson, because of his age, is he in danger here? There's a lot of questions around this one, Bryan. But the last thing for me is some people are not going to view this as a serious fight, right? They're going to just say that it's just a spectacle. Is this an event that boxing fans should tune into? And I think the most important question here, if you tune in, are you going to be entertained?
I think people can do what they want. Ultimately, I'm not going to really endorse this one way or the other. I think, it's important to know whether or not this is an actual fight or an exhibition. I feel like they're not announcing that yet because they feel like, this is just my guess, if you announce that it's an exhibition, I'm not sure how many people are going to watch it versus you advertising it as a real fight, especially with Mike Tyson posting Instagram stories of him being back in the gym. And let me tell you, I don't care how old you are, you won't want to take one of those punches that Mike Tyson is putting out there on his social media, so to speak. But in terms of how boxing fans should look at this, I mean, this is really, it could be looked at one of many different ways. I would say in one instance, it's kind of an indictment on the sport that it allows itself to get exposed like this in terms of, hey, Jake Paul could just come in, be a top 10 most interesting name in the sport that the masses are going to care about. Obviously, hardcore boxing fans would rather watch, like myself, would probably rather watch, flyweight title bouts on a random Saturday night as opposed to this. But at the same time, I recognize, at least because I have the self-awareness to know I'm in the minority there, and I'm going to watch this fight as someone who loves boxing and consumes boxing and covers boxing. I'm going to watch this fight. You can't ignore it because Mike Tyson's involved, because Jake Paul is involved, and Jake Paul is not somebody you can cover the sport and just sort of ignore. You could have the purity stance in all of this, but honestly, boxing is a sport that lost that a long time ago. So I think if this wasn't the sort of circus act that would surround the sport, something else would. And more things are happening because the sport is so all over the place and broken at this point right now. So I think that the fights are actually in a pretty good place, and you have some interesting fighters and some interesting competitors and title holders and things of that nature. But this, without a doubt, should be one of the most watched fights of the year. And that kind of tells you where the sport is right now.
Yeah, it does say a lot. And you know what? Netflix is absolutely hoping that it is one of the most watched fights of the year, and we'll see how that impacts them going forward as they attempt to stream more live sporting events. That is Bryan Fonseca, co-host of the Mandatory Boxing Show. Go check that out. Bryan, great insight. This fight going down on July 20th between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Bryan says he will be watching. I know a lot of other people will be too. Bryan, thank you for the insight. Appreciate it, man. We'll talk more boxing soon.
Absolutely. Anytime.